Hello there. Welcome into a Thursday edition of the show. So glad to have you, whether you're listening on 740 KVOR, Extra Sports 1300, or the streaming apps of those two fine radio stations, which you can find wherever fine radio station streaming apps are given away because they are free to download and they are free to use. And they are sponsored by Diversus Health, Mental Health, and well-being for all. A veritable cornucopia of sports topics await you, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this Thursday. You could call or text them in at 719-247-1313. Let's start with the Denver Nuggets, and I put this idea out yesterday. Well, really, in the day before, in the wake of the Nuggets losing to Oklahoma City. The issues with the Denver Nuggets that we have identified, it may only hurt them going up against Oklahoma City. I mean, that is a possibility here. Because last night, certainly not as meaningful a game as the OKC game was. But another Western Conference supposed contender in the Houston Rockets and the Denver Nuggets hand them their worst loss under Ime Udoka. 129-93. They destroyed them. So you have to wonder, as much doom and gloom as there is around the Denver Nuggets, is there only one team that exists in the Western Conference that can make the Nuggets, in a word, pay for it? I mean, their clutch time issues, you got to believe, will cost them a game or two in the playoffs. But looking at the bigger picture in a 7-game series against Houston or San Antonio or Minnesota, is it going to cause the Denver Nuggets to lose? Because I floated the idea that it in a world where, let's say, OKC doesn't represent the West, it could still be Denver being that team. Even as down on Denver as I was a couple of days ago in the wake of the OKC loss, and I stand by everything I said, I don't believe this team is going to beat Oklahoma City in a 7-game series. But I wasn't going so far as to say the Denver Nuggets are going to get bounced by another team not named Oklahoma City. And last night, I don't expect them to beat Houston in every game of a potential playoff series, 129-93. But it just speaks to how I think Denver still might be the second best team in the West. Here's David Adelman on the win and what it means for his basketball team.
And I just need each guy to stay positive with themselves and just know that the goal is for the team. And this is one of those examples of what we can be. We have to do more consistently, but I just like the overall juice, energy, the pace of play offensively. And then obviously defensively, we really flew around, got our hands on balls we haven't done as of late. And then couple that with taking care of the ball, which has been an issue as of late. So it was just a really solid team win.
It was. It would have been better if you would have gotten this kind of an effort, this kind of performance 3 days ago. Or 2 days ago, as it were. Wednesday to Monday. The timing would have been better a couple of days ago. But I do think last night allows you, if you're a Nuggets fan, to take a breath here and say, okay, this team is still really good. Acknowledging some of the reality of working everybody back in. Okay, that's a thing that might be contributing here. I still think that the Denver Nuggets could very well be the second best team in the West. And on paper, or the way they have performed, I understand why people are moving towards San Antonio. I'll just give the tiebreaker to Denver because they've been through it. I still, and maybe I'm just being incredibly stubborn when it comes to San Antonio, and I don't dislike San Antonio. In fact, I love San Antonio. I love watching them play. I think Wemby is phenomenal. I've just watched too much basketball to think that San Antonio's just going to show up when you have to, there's a little New England Patriots vibe with them, right? And by the way, the Nuggets play San Antonio tonight. But there's a little Patriots vibe. Like they kind of weren't very good, and now they're really, really good. But New England was able to get to a Super Bowl having to be the better team for one game. Right? It was multiple games, but against the same team once. You only have to be at your best once. Or CJ Stroud has to be at his worst. Or the Broncos have to have their backup quarterback for one game. And if New England had to play a 7-game series against some of the teams they went up against, would they be able to get through? I would have my doubts. And that's kind of what I'm applying to San Antonio here. This is not just, hey, one night could San Antonio beat Denver? Okay, well, of course they could. But the idea that the San Antonio Spurs are ready for 16 wins, 16 of the hardest wins that an NBA team can ever get without any past knowledge on what it takes to win in the postseason, about never going through it. So I'm still skeptical about their viability as a championship contender. From a talent perspective, yeah, they have championship level talent. And I have very little doubt that in the very near future, the San Antonio Spurs are going to win an NBA title. This year seems fast. That's all I'm saying. It just seems fast. So I'm giving the nod to Denver with their core group of players that have been through it. So last night, whether you believe this is either a sign that Oklahoma City is maybe the one hurdle that this Nuggets team can't clear, or B, this is the start to the Denver Nuggets becoming the team that we've been waiting for and the team that can beat OKC. Whichever side of the fence you're on here, it's important to know the why, how, or the how. How were they able to do this? Jamal Murray put up 30 points. He's done that 18 times this year. Nikola Jokic had a triple-double. Yawn. He always has triple-doubles. To me, one of the big differences last night was Cam Johnson. And what we may, given the stage of the season, the opponent, everything else, and given the conversation surrounding this guy as of late, last night was the finest performance of Cam Johnson's Nuggets career. Bar none. I thought he was terrific last night. 17 points, but had a couple of blocks, had a couple of steals, had some really nice passes, setting up other guys. I thought Cam Johnson existed within the Nuggets ecosystem better than he had at any point this season. So what changed? What did he do? Here's Cam Johnson.
Well, just be a little more active, a little bit more involved in moving around, trying to find windows, trying to find lanes.
Quite simple, but what he's speaking to there is it's everything. You know, as we continue to make the comparisons between Cam Johnson and Michael Porter because they're playing the same role, part of the reason why Michael Porter got so beat up by people around here was because Michael Porter, at times, his activity level would go down. There's this misconception that role is just go stand over there. We don't need you to do much, and we'll find you when we need you. It's actually quite the opposite. It's you have to be more active. You have to move around more. You have to be more available. Because if you just sit, you're easy to ignore. That's what happened with Michael Porter. He'd camp out in that corner, and there would be multiple possessions that would go by where you didn't even notice that Michael Porter was out there. And I think maybe this is the light bulb moment for Cam Johnson, where it's like, oh, I shouldn't just wait for the ball to find me. I got to go find it. And it's actually part of the reason why I thought that Cam Johnson could fit the Nuggets better than even Michael Porter did, because of his ability to slash and move off the ball, something that Michael Porter wasn't as good at. But I think being in that box that you're in, where you're the third, sometimes fourth, depending on, how Christian Brown's doing on any given night, the fifth option when the starters are all out there, I think it does lend itself to saying, hey, things are working. Other guys are coming to the forefront. I'm just going to hang back and wait for my time. It's like, no. You got to keep pushing. You got to make yourself force your way up that pecking order. Don't be the fifth option behind Christian Brown. You shouldn't be. You should be above him at all times. There's some nights where Aaron Gordon, the Nuggets need him more on the defensive end than the offensive end. Now you're option 3. But you have to move. And it's just this feeling of playing with Jokic, oh, the ball's going to find me. I don't want to look for mine. Don't worry. Number 15 is going to distribute the basketball the way he sees fit in order to give the Nuggets the best chance to convert a bucket on that possession. You just do your thing. You try to be that option. And if Jokic deems you worthy, he will find you. But I think that there's maybe a misnomer that, hey, I can just post up anywhere and he'll find me. Like, yes, but is you being in the corner or you being over here, you're not moving around, does that make you the best option? Not necessarily. So you got to change it up. You got to be more active, even though inevitably you will get fewer touches because there's just a lot of mouths to feed, and Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, they have the ball a lot, especially in crunch time. So maybe it's the light bulb moment for Cam Johnson and understanding what is required of him in this role. David Adelman kind of spoke to this last night as well.
As he finds his rhythm and then new people come back and the rotation changes and it feels different, everybody's trying to, do the right thing for the guy next to him. Sometimes, it stunts flow. And tonight was a good flowing game for us, and Cam was a good example of that.
That last part that he brought up, all of this is born out of unselfishness. Like Cam Johnson is an unselfish player. Michael Porter was unselfish in that role. Christian Brown's an unselfish player. Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, all of these guys, it's a great culture that the Nuggets have in terms of everybody wants to lift everybody else up. But there are times where, and I'll use Cam Johnson as the example, like, dude, you're in this funk. You got to get out of this. And the only way you're going to get out of this is if you get the ball in your hands and you score some points. So I think it was all coming from a good place in Cam Johnson, the new guy. This is already established championship team. He's coming in. He doesn't want to ruffle feathers, all this kind of stuff. And now you have this similar dynamic with all these guys being worked back into the lineup. And Cam Johnson's like, no, it's okay. I'll let that. No, dude, you got to do. No, it's your time. I think that's what David Adelman is speaking to. So it was an encouraging, in the world of two things can be true. Monday could be very disappointing, and Monday can make you feel, as I do, that the Nuggets this year, they're not ready to topple OKC. But that doesn't have to mean that this season is going to end in abject disaster for the Denver Nuggets. Because they are still more talented than most of the teams in the NBA. They have the best player in the world, and they have a ceiling that not many teams can reach, that I doubt San Antonio can consistently reach in their first postseason experience, or that Houston's capable of right now. Because that's a team, too. The reason why the score was 129-93 is not just because that was about the best basketball we've seen from the Nuggets in a long time. It's also indicative of what I said yesterday, that Houston's kind of coming apart at the seams here. And I'm trying to figure out why, and there's one player that's different. And that guy, I think, had 11 points last night. And I've seen that guy go to other places and things kind of go downhill. That's my theory. But I don't, I'm not in it with the Rockets. So it just, from where I'm sitting, it looks like the Rockets are coming undone a little bit. And every day that goes by, they're less and less viable as a championship contender. So if you don't believe that San Antonio is ready to run the gauntlet just getting here, if you believe that Houston's kind of coming apart at the seams, and you've seen this team now win the season series from Houston, win the season series from Minnesota, that's what I'm getting at. There might be only one team in the NBA that can beat the Denver Nuggets. Unfortunately, it seems inevitable that they're going to have to go through them. And it's the very team that they made all these offseason moves to beat. So that part of it's disappointing, but let's not go overboard and say that the Nuggets are necessarily on the verge of crashing and burning. 719-247-1313. Your thoughts on what you saw last night from the Denver Nuggets. Just getting going on this Thursday edition of the show. Glad to have you on 740 KVOR and Extra Sports 1300. Saturday, Colorado Springs Switchbacks FC opens the home portion of their 2026 schedule, taking on Las Vegas Lights FC. It's an afternoon match at Widener Field, 3:00 this Saturday. If you'd like to go, I have a 4-pack of tickets for the 13th texter to text Switchbacks and their name to 719-247-1313. That's Switchbacks and your name to 719-247-1313. If you are not the 13th texter, there are tickets still available for the 2026 home opener at switchbacksfc.com. So yesterday, and there's no way to sugarcoat this, it was a really trying end to a trying season of Air Force basketball, men's basketball specifically. The 35-point loss to Nevada that they had in the first round of the Mountain West tournament was the largest margin of victory in the history of that tournament, which means, for our purposes, largest margin of defeat in the history of that tournament. And the Falcons finish with just 3 wins on the year, which is the fewest they've had ever. And of course, you have the dismissal, the parting of ways, however you want to phrase it, with head coach Joe Scott. It's been a very trying season, and you hoped, coming off of what the women did out in Vegas, that maybe there would be some of that magic that kind of rubbed off on the men's team. It didn't happen. And I saw something on Twitter yesterday from Vic Lombardi of Altitude, and this is certainly not I think it's a good question to ask. I don't think Vic Lombardi meant anything negative by it whatsoever. But I think what he said is, how is Air Force supposed to compete in the era of NIL? Right? And I'm sure it's a question that has even been asked by people around here. But I think if you really look at what's going on lately with Air Force Academy sports, you will see that it's not impossible. First of all, I would say, just my opinion, I think the transfer portal is a bigger problem than NIL. Right? Because the NIL dollars are going to go down as you get lower. It's not like Air Force is playing in the SEC or something like that. So the dollars are getting a little bit lower when you get to the Mountain West. Certainly in other sports, NIL is a factor, but not as big a one. But the transfer portal, to me, because here's the thing about Air Force, and it's always been this way, but now you have all this apparatus, if you will, in place with the transfer portal and unlimited transfers. That further underscores the way that Air Force does this. Air Force has to go through a true building cycle. Okay, because you're not going to win with throwing out all freshmen, right? And what do you see across college basketball? The teams that are most successful, yeah, they have a couple of blue chip freshmen, but they got a lot of players that have played a ton of college basketball or college football or college hockey at a high level. These sports are getting older. People are staying. They're not jumping to the leagues, all of this kind of stuff. But Air Force has to bring in a bunch of freshmen. They have to coach them up. They have to develop them and then reap the rewards, hopefully when they become juniors. And I think a perfect example of this from where I just was in Las Vegas is Emily Adams of the women's basketball team. Okay, she's someone that came in and she is where she had a very small role coming in as a freshman. And it was a little bit more, and it was a little bit more, and she worked on her game and kept working and kept working and kept getting coached up. And now the conference season this year, she just pops. And she's phenomenal. And Air Force only gets to that title game the other night if Milani Perry has help from Emily Adams and others. And Emily was named to the all-tournament team. Stories like that used to be prevalent across mid-major sports. Just call it mid-major. It applies, to Air Force in hockey, women's basketball, men's basketball, football, essentially play at the mid-major level, right? You would hear stories like that all the time. These rosters would be littered with those people. Now that's not the case anymore. These schools are bringing in ready-made products. They're not developing anything at some of these schools. But Air Force still has to go the long road. So Air Force is down, and then they get a little bit better, and then they get a little bit better, and then they peak, and then they got to kind of start over again. But there is a peak there where they could be competitive. But you see, like Air Force hockey had a good season. I just came back from Las Vegas where Air Force played for a conference title. Knocked off San Diego State. A team that was able to bring in transfers. And a pretty easy place to recruit to, if we're being honest about it. Who wouldn't want to go to San Diego State? Who wouldn't want to go to UNLV? But yet their Air Force was. So it's possible. But you just have to bide your time. The idea that you're just going to reload and reload and reload, that's not going to happen. And it never was that way. And now it's even more so it's not going to happen. They're just going to have to keep building. But I refuse to believe that it's impossible for Air Force men's basketball to win. Now, what do we talk about winning? Winning a national title? Well, tell me the last national title that they won. So let's just all get on the same page about what we're talking about here. They can be competitive. I will acknowledge that in basketball, men's basketball particularly, it's probably the most difficult. Football's the ultimate team game. Scheme, all of this kind of stuff. That Troy Calhoun, Mike Thiessen and company, they can outsmart you. They can build a better, more well-rounded team, more well-coached team. Hockey would kind of be the next step down there. Getting one or two difference makers can move the needle, but it's still very team-oriented, and Frank Serratori and his staff do a great job of putting it together. I acknowledge that in basketball, like one dude and boom. Because I've seen it on the women's side. Milani Perry didn't get Air Force to the conference title game alone, but they wouldn't have gone there without her. But she went to Air Force. Chris Hedden, who is now, I just saw, up for the Player of the Year in Atlantic hockey. The future is incredibly bright for what Liam Zarka can be after what he showed last year for the football team. So, yes, one player can make a difference. So if you pay a dude a bunch of money and bring him in, he can immediately move the needle for you. And Air Force doesn't have access to that player. But that doesn't mean that they can't find their own Chris Hedden, their own Liam Zarka, their own Milani Perry to make them competitive. It takes great recruiting, and it takes the right leader of that program. And Air Force said it in their statement when they made the decision with Joe Scott. It wasn't the right fit for what's going on right now with this Air Force program. And they need a different perspective, a different tone, all of this kind of stuff. Of course, I'm building onto it, but they say it just wasn't the right fit for where they are right now. So as disappointing as this was, I've seen this firsthand. It's not that the job is easy, and it's not that it hasn't gotten more difficult for the other coaches, for Troy Calhoun, for Stacey McIntyre, for Frank Serratori. I know it's much more difficult for them than it was 5-10 years ago. And it was difficult back then. But I've seen it in these other sports. Baseball had Paul Skeens. Shame on me for bearing the lead. The baseball team at the Air Force Academy had Paul freaking Skeens. It's possible. I understand the question. And again, I don't think anything negative was meant about it. I think that unless maybe you have an affinity for the team in Fort Collins, although I talked to CSU people out in Vegas, and they said, well, not tonight, we're not rooting for you, but they love the story of Air Force while I was out there. So I don't know, Army maybe? Navy? I can't speak for them. But I think everybody would like to see Air Force be able to compete, because I saw it firsthand out in Vegas. People were going nuts. They loved it. The Havoc, the GCU student section was there the other night. And I wasn't locked in. I wasn't sitting there with them. But it sounded like they were rooting for Air Force. Like, nobody wants Air Force to stay down, so that's not what I'm putting on anybody. Everybody wants to see the Air Force Academy be successful. But what I'm saying is it is possible. Expectations have to be a little bit different on what ultimate success looks like. But you get one or two athletes that are made of the right stuff, that are looking to embrace what the academy is. Like, they don't come around every single year, but they're out there. You can't tell me that there are football players that fit that description, and hockey players that fit that description, and baseball players and gymnasts. Air Force has one of the best gymnasts in America right now. Don't tell me that somehow men's basketball is this black hole and there's no young men that are terrific basketball players that wouldn't want to be at the Air Force Academy. It's more difficult for that program than all the others. Again, I believe that. But to say it's impossible, I can't subscribe to that. I can't agree with that. And I hope that what that program does now is find someone who embraces that challenge. Because that's the other part. And not to say that Joe Scott didn't. He absolutely did. He signed up for a second stint at the Air Force Academy. Joe Scott was 100% committed to getting this program back to where he had it the last time. It didn't work. Different time, different circumstances, all of this kind of stuff. It just didn't work. But I got to believe there's somebody out there that will also embrace the challenge and will be able to find that difference maker to make men's basketball at the Air Force Academy competitive. And we'll see what Director of Athletics Nate Pine and company, who they bring back and who they get to lead this program. It's a special breed of coaches to want to coach at a service academy. Always was, and even more so now. But I see right now there are multiple successful coaches with good programs at the Air Force Academy. Men's basketball can be one of them too. 719-24/7. 1313. More Drive Time Sports after this on 740 KVOR and Extra Sports 1300. Think you have the luck of the Irish? Enter to win our pot full of $5,000 cash in our Luck of the Irish giveaway. Just head to either kvor.com or extrasports1300.com to enter this national contest sponsored locally by Bullseye Plumbing, Heating, and Air. No luck needed when Bullseye's on target. So some more of the fallout. Oh, by the way, I want to put this in here. Congratulations to Scott, who picked up the 4-pack of tickets to see the Switchbacks home opener against Las Vegas. More chances for you to win forthcoming. More fallout from Bam Adebayo in his 83-point game the other night. This was on the Miami Heat social media account. It was a video where Bam Adebayo is walking through the tunnel after scoring those 83 points and is being asked a bunch of questions. And then he runs into Pat Riley, the team president, in the hallway. And listen carefully to what Pat Riley says to Bam Adebayo, because it is exactly what we are complaining about when it comes to what Bam Adebayo did the other night. Here's Pat Riley to Bam Adebayo on the Heat's social media accounts.
I would have taken you out at 7. Yes, sir. That's right.
I would have taken you out at 70. Because around that time, right after that, was when the game turned into a sham and a farce. And I actually feel for Bam Adebayo. Because he had an amazing, amazing performance that should be widely celebrated. And then all the other crap happened. Miami intentionally missed free throws. Washington is trying to, guard him full court to keep him from continuing to score, something that the Wizards, because they're so god-awful, cannot possibly hope to be successful in. And, by the way, it was all Miami Heat, what their motivation was to get Bam past Kobe. That's what it was all about. And you have to understand that people are a bit sensitive about anything regarding Kobe Bryant's legacy. So you do all of this slop in order for Bam Adebayo to pass Kobe Bryant. So obviously, yes, you are going to come under scrutiny. You are going to be criticized when you make a mockery of the game. If they would have left it at 70 or 65 or 60 and called it a day, because I don't know if you notice this or if Eric Spoelstra noticed this, the Miami Heat were up by more than 20 points. The sole reason they left him in the game was to continue to score. And by actually pulling him out late in the game, it showed that it wasn't about setting the all-time record. It wasn't about going after Will. It was just to surpass Kobe. Bam Adebayo had a legitimate, spectacular 65, 70-point performance. It was what happened after that that is the reason for all the consternation, rightly so. At a time, by the way, understand the forces at play here. Understand the environment. The NBA product is as down as it has been in this country in a long time. Right? The legitimacy of the games, how worthwhile the games are to watch is being called into question more and more every day. and you bring that kind of crap into this environment, yeah, you're essentially lighting the fuse, a very short fuse. We collectively have a very short fuse when it comes to the NBA, and it's shenanigans right now. And the Miami Heat lit that fuse just to put Bam Adebayo over one of the most revered figures in recent basketball history. But this isn't about, oh, Bam passed Kobe. It adds to it, but it just is the fact that the game, it wasn't a game over those last few minutes that Bam Adebayo was in the game. It wasn't basketball. And then you throw on top of it the Kobe Bryant of it all. And then you throw on top of it the fact that he shot 42 free throws. I heard a stat today on Sirius XM, great show that Frank Isola and Brian Scalabrine do in the morning, that if you took away his free throws, all free throws, the highest scoring games, Wilt would still be number one, but he would have like 73 instead of 100. Bam Adebayo without his free throws would have been like in the 70s in terms of not 70 points, ranking in the 70s of the highest scoring games in NBA history. So that's another thing. It's not just one thing. It's a lot of different things. But for me, at the top of the list is that the game devolved to such a gross place. And the president of the Miami Heat, Pat Riley, who is a ball knower, he is the ball knower of all ball knowers, is saying, maybe half kidding, but only half kidding, I would have pulled you out at 70. I think there was a part of this that even Pat Riley, even though it's his organization and his player that he has great affinity for that is doing this, I think even Pat Riley felt a little, for lack of a better word, icky about the way that game happened. I don't understand why so many people are saying this is an overreaction. I think those people are underreacting because this is what we're talking about with the NBA and the slop that we are shown night in, night out. More Drive Time Sports after this. Welcome in. Glad to have you. Appreciate you watching the show as you do on a daily basis on our social media platforms at 740 KVOR, at Extra Sports 1300, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it. We're there. And while you're there, like, subscribe, and most importantly, comment, because this is an interactive experience, and you can also communicate via more traditional means by calling or texting 719-247-1313. Today, the Denver Broncos put the cherry on the sundae made of not ice cream. I'll put it that way. This free agency period has not at all been what Broncos fans hoped and dreamed it would be, or what NFL insiders predicted it to be. It's been a lot of bringing back Sean's guys, and there is no more Sean guy than Lil Jordan Humphrey. And today, the Broncos made it official that Lil Jordan is back on the Denver Broncos. And at this point, I feel bad for Lil Jordan Humphrey. The guy's just trying to find gainful employment. He's a fine player, but he now represents any shortcomings that Sean Payton has are represented in Lil Jordan Humphrey. And Lil Jordan Humphrey didn't ask for any of this, but he is the embodiment of what Sean Payton lacks, which is an enthusiasm for players that aren't his. Right? He just doesn't, and he went into this whole analogy during the season about how his parents always used to buy couches secondhand, and they thought they were getting a great deal, and then they find out that like the leg is wobbly. Like, Sean Payton has this just adversity to bringing in players from the outside unless he's just 1,000,000% sure that they're going to fit in. Because we can't say that this type of offseason has been, exactly what every offseason has been under Sean Payton, because when he came in, it was, your head was spinning. There were so many ins and outs, so many players going out, so many coming in, so much money being spent, right? Ben Powers, Mike McGlinchey. But man, is he particular. I guess that's the nicest way I can put it. But the guys that have proven that they can operate within his system, the guys that have proven that they can take the Sean Payton coaching, man, he just loves them. And loyalty is a virtuous trait, but it can also hurt you. And there is no doubt about it that it is hurting the Denver Broncos. Not saying every one of these pans out, but just look at what is going on. Romeo Doubs ends up in New England. Kenneth Walker ends up in Kansas City. You have the Bills are adding DJ Moore. The Ravens added Trey Hendrickson. Like, Denver wasn't head and shoulders above all of those teams. Now, the one team I will say that hasn't quite moved the needle, as much as I like the addition of Kenneth Walker, the Chiefs have more work to do to make their roster complete here. But that even underscores how much the Denver Broncos should have added Kenneth Walker, because I think Kenneth Walker immediately moves the needle for the Denver Broncos. Whereas with the Kansas City Chiefs, it doesn't quite get there yet, because now they got to figure out who's going to play corner for them. But Baltimore, adding Trey Hendrickson, you don't tell me right now that you think that next year the Denver Broncos are going to be better than the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills and the New England Patriots. Like, the bar has been set, to Sean Payton's credit. Okay? And there are a few teams that are positioning themselves to get in the way of the Broncos getting there. And the Broncos' answer to all of this is to just keep bringing back guys from this team. And I don't want to say that there's no value in that, but that's like Captain, was it G.I. Joe or Captain Planet? That's half the battle. But that's half. You got to do all of it. It's all encompassing. It's the draft. It's retaining your own guys. It's internal improvement. It's outside free agents. It's a big piece of this. I mean, think about in the Broncos. I mentioned this earlier. The Broncos making the moves that they did when Sean Payton first arrived. How could you not say that outside free agents didn't greatly benefit the Denver Broncos? The work they did in the trenches laid the foundation for what they are now. So don't tell me that the Broncos have done it the way they're doing it this offseason the whole time. They haven't. They've brought in outside free agents. And I'm not saying that the Broncos got to spend like drunken sailors here, but there are specific players here and there that they could get. And yeah, they're not cheap. Travis Etienne is not cheap. You know why? Because he's really good. Welcome to free agency. They overpaid for McGlinchey and Ben Powers. And no one has complained about it, because it's worked and it's given the Denver Broncos exactly what they need. Right now, you have two things, and overall, George Payton and Sean Payton have done a very good job. Okay, it's kind of like the Denver Nuggets. Like, there's a gray area here where they're not terrible. The Broncos could run it back and not sign a single free agent and be a competitive team next year. But they're looking to take the next step, to go one step further, not just maintain. But what you have is, and everybody has their shortcomings, you have Sean Payton, who is hyper-focused on his guys and overvalues his own guys and devalues other people's guys. Travis Etienne is not worth $13 million. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. In a free market economy, Travis Etienne is worth $13 million. He's worth $13 million to the Denver Broncos. They win a Super Bowl, nobody's going to be talking about how much money Travis Etienne makes. But one of Sean Payton's shortcomings is that he is loyal to a fault for his guys. And a lot of his guys are guys that aren't as talented as their peers. I'll just say it. They're not. They're great in, they're great teammates. They're great culture guys. They're good players. But Sean Payton believes that he makes the difference. That his system, his coaching. I mean, the guy was obsessed with Taysom Hill. Talented guy, but I mean, what is a Taysom Hill ultimately going to win you? So you have that. And then you have George Payton, who I think either he was pushed and pressured into the Russell Wilson deal, or he got so burned by the Russell Wilson trade that he just, the draft picks, the preciouses, like he just, it seems like he maybe overvalues them. So I don't know if this is a new phenomenon born out of the Russell Wilson trade and getting so burned by it, or George Payton was always this way, and maybe being the new guy in town and wanting to make a splash kind of deviated from his normal pattern in order to make this big splashy move. I don't know. But there was something that Jaguars GM James Gladstone said. I saw this on social media. Ari Mayrov at My Sports Update. He aggregates a lot of NFL content. This popped up on my feed, and it's James Gladstone talking about, because the Jaguars, not as bad as the Broncos. In fact, the Broncos are now the only team in the NFL, the only one, who have yet to bring in an outside player. They're the only one left. Not one player has been brought in by the Denver Broncos. But something that James Gladstone said, I think, is true about George Payton's thinking. Here's the Jaguars GM talking about why, in the wake of losing Etienne and Devin Lloyd, that the Jaguars haven't immediately gone out and made a counter move, essentially, to try and compensate for the losses of these guys. I think George Payton thinks the same way James Gladstone does. And he explained it perfectly good. John Franklin Myers and some of these other guys who have taken deals elsewhere. If the Broncos don't bring in somebody to essentially offset that, they get compensatory. I think George Payton highly values them. So you have a coach who has a bias towards, quote unquote, his guys. So that's why a lot of, quote unquote, his guys are back on the Denver Broncos, even though a lot of them did not make a tremendous impact. And I'm not talking about Singleton, Stranad. I'm talking about Kroll and Lil Jordan Humphrey and Troutman and Prentice, like these guys. And then you have a GM that lives for the draft, loves the draft, wants as many bites at the apple as he can get. I don't know if George Payton necessarily wants to spin them off like James Gladstone's talking about. I think at this point, that's your best case scenario. is that recouping these picks and having all of these picks will then allow George Payton, they were rumored to be interested in Jalen Waddle. Well, having another pick in a particular round allows them to maybe feel better about parting with the pick in a certain round. I think that's what you have to hope for if you're a Broncos fan wanting them to bring in outside help. But that's 2027. What about 2026? So for all the good that the George and Sean Payton have done for the Denver Broncos, we're into an offseason where maybe who they are and their philosophies are getting in the way of the Denver Broncos becoming a better team. And you did see in New Orleans a little bit of a decay of the franchise, right? They got to the highest of heights, won a Super Bowl. No one can take that away from them. And then it just kind of slowly went the other way until Sean Payton left. But the Broncos haven't reached the pinnacle yet. Okay, if they win a Super Bowl and then they start to do some of this stuff and they slowly regress, then maybe it's more acceptable. You haven't even gotten to that point yet. You got to do everything to get there. And you look around and you see these other teams making some additions. You see both of these two things. One, you see teams that you're probably going to have to be battling with all next year, whether it's in your division or in the playoffs, that are addressing needs, that are getting better. And then you have players that could make you better, because not everybody's needs are the same, but you have players that could have made you better that you thought were too expensive or weren't the exact right fit. I think that's what we're getting here. In an offseason that was promised, maybe not by the Denver Broncos, and maybe that's where we all went wrong. We should have listened. Greg Penner sat up there and said, yeah, I'll be Mr. Moneybags, but I think that we're going to be more targeted. Code word for cheaper. When it comes to free agency, they told us the signs were there that this offseason was not going to be what it was cracked up to be. But yet it kept going, and NFL insiders, many of them with very close ties to Sean Payton, said, watch out for Denver. And then hopes went up, and you get little Jordan Humphrey. Again, poor little Jordan. He didn't ask for any of this, but he is the face of all of this. Sean Payton loves his own guys, and George Payton loves the idea of getting more draft capital. On their face, neither thing is necessarily bad. George Payton has done a good job through the draft, and some of Sean Payton's guys have been contributors to the Denver Broncos. But there are times that call upon you to deviate a little bit from it for the sake of making the team better. And it just doesn't seem like George or Sean Payton seem particularly inclined to do that right now, which is a little bit surprising, even though the Broncos kind of tried to tell us all that this was not going to be a free agent bonanza in Denver. 719-247-1313. Take your thoughts on that. Meanwhile, a team that has gotten better by valuing players from the outside. The Baltimore Ravens, their general manager, Eric DeCosta, saying what the whole Max Crosby fiasco looks like isn't what it looks like. It's not what it is. See if you're buying what he's selling next on 740 KVOR and Extra Sports 1300. Eric DaCosta, public enemy number one right now in the NFL world after he backed out of the blockbuster trade of Max Crosby to the Baltimore Ravens. Many, including yours truly, saying shenanigans, cold feet. Eric DaCosta trying to tell us it's not what it looks like. See if you're buying it.
We were not able to complete the process of acquiring the player.
Okay, first of all, was this a catch? He didn't complete. I immediately, when he said that, I thought of the catch in the Bills-Broncos game. He didn't complete the process. Anyway, here's Eric DaCosta.
We were not able to complete the process of acquiring the player based on, our assessment of the situation. Very, very, I think, disappointing to me. Nobody more disappointed than me. Player I greatly admire. I think one of my favorite players in the entire NFL. I know our fans are upset, devastated. I understand that. Tough situation. But I think for the Ravens, the right situation. And my role as GM and Jesse's role as head coach and Sashi's role as president, stewards of the organization. And we have to make tough calls. And this was certainly a tough call to make.
Stewards of the organization. Interesting phrase used by Eric DaCosta there. Stewards of the organization. Wouldn't part of your duties also be to not give up all of your premium draft capital? Like, could you argue that being good stewards of the organization in their minds was like, oh, well, we like this guy, but maybe we got a little too nutty with the idea that we would give up 2 first-round picks, because that is very un-Raven-like. And everyone pointed it out in the moment that Ravens don't do these kind of trades. And then lo and behold, they don't end up doing one of these trades. And then they just so happen to be able to land Hendrickson moments after. And I think something DaCosta even said fans the flame of conspiracy theory. Listen to, because this is what's coming out of Baltimore now. Oh, we were going to do both. We were going to put Max Crosby on one side and we were going to put Trey Hendrickson on the other. That was the plan. Which, think about it, that would have been insane. But that would have required an insane amount of money and draft capital. You would have had to pull off the 2 first-round picks for Crosby, paid him, and then went out and paid Hendrickson. It's a lot of blood and treasure tied up in 2 guys for an organization that is usually pretty conservative. But something that DaCosta said, I think, just further fuels the conspiracy theories. Take a listen.
We were trying to sign Tyler, obviously. We weren't able to get that done. Looking at the best ways for us to improve our football team, at some point, we just said, you know what, this might be a guy that really fits us. And we've played against him twice a year for the last whatever many years, 4 or 5 years. And thought, hey, maybe this is a way for us to get better as a football team. So that was definitely a possibility for us. Not to say that it would have happened, but definitely something that we had contemplated and discussed with Trey.
The idea that what they contemplated was putting Trey Hendrickson with Max Crosby. But did you catch the first part of this? Eric DaCosta talking about what they were going to do in the wake of losing Tyler Lindenbaum. As you might recall, Tyler Lindenbaum went to the Raiders in an insane overpay. The Raiders went above and beyond when it comes to how much money they gave Tyler Linderbaum, a record-setting deal for an interior lineman. They poached one of the Ravens players by giving him an insane amount of money. You don't think that rubbed them the wrong way? So now it's with that soundbite being out there, it's gone from the Ravens had second thoughts, cold feet, all this kind of stuff to like maybe they were trying to screw over the Raiders. Because look at the domino effect that has happened. So the Raiders had to bring Crosby back. Like technically they could afford him, but they went out and signed Kwity Paye to be their primary pass rusher. And now he's not going to be. And they spent a ton of other money, some of it with the idea that they would be rid of Max Crosby. I don't want to say rid. They didn't want to get rid of Max Crosby necessarily. They wanted to, but they had to face the reality of we got to give up something to get what we need back, which is draft capital. But then they went out and spent, you have to think they went out and spent some of Max Crosby's dollars on some of these players. Maybe it's the difference between what the Ravens were willing to offer Tyler Linderbaum and what the Raiders eventually paid him. Now it's going from having second thoughts and cold feet to, maybe they're trying to stick it to the Raiders. Because they went so nuts to prying Tyler Linderbaum away from him. Now, I'm willing every once in a while to don my tinfoil hat. I don't know that I would go that far to say that this was some kind of front office revenge. But I don't think his explanation was even that good to begin with. And then you mentioned the fact that you decided to sign Trey Hendrickson in the wake of losing Tyler Linderbaum. So you were reeling a bit after losing Linderbaum. You're like, what can we do? And you sign Trey Hendrickson. Or maybe you decided, yeah, you know what? We're going to back out. Because, and here's the other domino. The Raiders can't trade Max Crosby now. They can't. And I know Max Crosby is fired up to be Raider. He didn't want to leave. He didn't want to leave in the first place. But the Raiders now can't trade him and get back what they are looking for, because every general manager that's hitting up Spy Tech is offering them, how about a 4th round pick swap? Like the Sharks are circling. No one's even going to come close to offering the Raiders what Baltimore did. So the Raiders cannot trade Max Crosby right now. So they can come out and say all the right things and everything is hunky-dory and all that kind of stuff. The fact of the matter is, if they had another suitor that would step in and go, I'll give you exactly what Baltimore want, Max Crosby would be on the first plane out of Vegas. But no one's going to offer that. I don't think that the Ravens were trying to stick it to the Raiders. But I also don't think that the words from Eric DaCosta have swayed me at all. They did something that was so out of character for them, and they had the ability to address that need in another way that would be more in character for them, and they took the opportunity. That's what I believe. And Eric DaCosta did not sway me off of that position. And then he throws on top of it, mentioning Tyler Lindenbaum, and you start to connect the dots, and you're wait a minute. So they were reeling a little bit after the Raiders poached one of their players? But look, fact of the matter, Ravens did well. Ravens have a chance here. Look at the whole picture. Even if you think Max Crosby is a better player than Trey Hendrickson. They get Trey Hendrickson and a first-round pick in the next 2 drafts. And the money that they saved by not having to pay Max Crosby. The Ravens are better off for backing out of that deal. So if you're a Ravens fan, then, and this is advice coming from, a Kansas City Chiefs fan, and I've had to, fight off and fight against a lot of stuff. I'm just saying, look at where your team is and don't let the outside noise bother you, because your team's in a better spot for doing this than they would have been if they would have traded for Max Crosby. And I don't buy for a second that the Baltimore Ravens were willing to give Trey Hendrickson a huge free agent deal and willing to trade for Max. I don't buy that. You buying any of what DaCosta is selling? 719-24-7-1313. We got breaking NFL news. An NFL team is making a free agent signing. No, not the Denver Broncos. Be serious. Come on now. Broncos making a free agent signing. Give me a break. Nope. Kyler Murray to the Vikings is official. It is a one-year deal, according to Tom Pelissero. And there is a no-tag clause, which I do think is important because for Kyler Murray, if the Kevin O'Connell, rehabilitation clinic for quarterbacks does its job, then Kyler Murray wants to re-enter the free agent pool. Now, it's not to say he doesn't want to end up going back to Minnesota, and maybe with some of the lament that the Vikings have for letting Daniel Jones leave, maybe they would be high, and Darnold for that matter, they'd be willing to keep Kyler Murray around long term. But the no tag means that Kyler is going to do this all again next year. This was always the best idea for him. And with Kevin O'Connell and with the division that I think there are some question marks around the other three teams and their viability for next season, I think you look at Minnesota and I think you look at the Giants as two teams that are the best bet to far exceed what they did this past season. Now, I'm not placing either the Vikings or the Giants in the Super Bowl next year. But with the schedules those teams have, with their coaches, with the quarterbacks that each of them have, they could turn it right around. And because I do think a change of scenery was what Kyler Murray needed. There's talent there. Like, you can make all the Call of Duty jokes you want, and they're all hilarious. But the guy's talented. But now he's going to a place that knows how to rehabilitate quarterbacks. Develop them, I don't know. Ask J.J. McCarthy how that's going. But the rehabilitation that has gone on with some of these quarterbacks that have passed through Minnesota, that works. And I don't, where that leaves J.J. McCarthy. Look, you're hearing a lot of stuff about how the Vikings aren't out on McCarthy. Right? And they could still say that with this one-year deal for Kyler Murray. J.J. McCarthy's coming off of injury, needs more development. They go Kyler 1 year, and then they go back to J.J. McCarthy. I could see it, but also what if Kyler works? Again, the Vikings have to be well, we know for a fact, Kevin O'Connell talked about how he wished they wouldn't have let Daniel Jones leave the building, and they sure as heck are lamenting the fact that Sam Darnold left. In fact, reportedly, not necessarily in fact, because we don't know, but the entire argument that led to the Vikings GM getting fired was over Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy. O'Connell wanted to keep Darnold. If Kyler Murray hits, Minnesota's not letting him go. Now they're going to have to pay for him. They're going to have to give him a multi-year deal. But they're not doing that again. The last two guys they let out of the building, one of them was well on his way to be the MVP of the league and was leading a historically great offense to begin the year in Indianapolis, and the other one ended up winning the Super Bowl. If Kyler Murray works, they're not letting him go, which means they're done with J.J. McCarthy. Which brings up, why were they even in the J.J. McCarthy business in the first place? And my answer to that is I don't know. I didn't get in the first place. Now, I understand the best way to go about it is to draft and develop a quarterback. But of the quarterbacks in that Penix, Nix, May, Caleb, I like J.J. McCarthy the least by a considerable margin. So I don't get why the Vikings were in the McCarthy business in the first place. But they're certainly going to be out of it if Kyler Murray works. And I think he has the potential to work. Smart decision by Kyler Murray. And a decision that could make the Minnesota Vikings a little bit more difficult to deal with this year, even in a very good division in the NFC North. But the Lions, do we know that they're getting it right with the coordinators? No. Chicago Bears are ripe to have a regression this year. I mean, they are the NFC version of the Denver Broncos. A lot of their wins, and go back to Washington the year before. And I know we didn't really get to see what this season looked like in Washington, but all three of those quarterbacks, a little pixie dust. A lot of close games, a lot of late game heroics, a lot of stuff that's very hard to replicate year in and year out. And then the Packers will see with, healthy Micah Parsons. I think all three of these other teams are still going to be respectable. I don't think any of them are going to necessarily be bad, but it's kind of the same thing with what I'm saying with the Giants. I just don't love the direction that any of the other teams in that division are going, and I love the direction that the Giants are going. They're pointed up. I think Dallas has a chance to be pointed up depending on what else they end up doing. But I still think they're a year away from recouping what they lost in Micah Parsons and turning that into something. I don't love where the Eagles are. And I got a lot of questions about Washington. So I think right now you have to look at Minnesota and New York as the fan bases that should have the most hope for a turnaround, a significant turnaround. Like doubling their win total, maybe more from what it was this year. So Kyler Murray, 1-year deal with the Minnesota Vikings. We'll see if Kevin O'Connell can do it again here. Josh Dobbs, Sam Darnold, Daniel Jones, although we didn't see Daniel Jones play for the Minnesota Vikings. But Daniel Jones raved about the learning he did while he was in Minnesota, albeit for a brief time. I think it's going to work. I think Kyler Murray is going to be Minnesota's quarterback for more than just this year. 719-247-1313. Your thoughts on that move made today by the Minnesota Vikings. Coming up next, we'll hit the 3 stories that are driving the show. The best night we've seen from Cam Johnson in a Nuggets uniform. The NHL raises their hand and says, my bad. And the Denver Broncos bringing back one of their own. This is Drive Time Sports on 740 KVOR and Extra Sports 1300. Hello there. Welcome in. Glad to have you on this fine day. Appreciate you listening to the show on 740 KVOR or Extra Sports 1300, or maybe you're streaming those radio stations on our apps, which are free to download, free to use, and sponsored by Diversus Health, mental health and well-being for all. You could also watch the show on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, at Extra Sports 1300 or at 740 KVOR. If you'd like to take your participation a step further and would like to call or text into the show, 719-24-7. 1313 is the number to do that. Perhaps you have a thought or two about the three stories driving the show today. And we start with a great night for the Nuggets and a particularly great night for one of their more beleaguered players.
Murray has it on the right side, gets down the lane, throws it, kick out three, Bruce Brown. Got it! Denver's up 111-78 with 7.5 to go on Houston, and this thing is over!
Cause on the call for Altitude Sports as heard on Extra Sports 1300, 129-93. The Denver Nuggets absolutely blow out the Houston Rockets, which I think backs up the thought that I have been having the last couple of days, that all of these shortcomings that the Nuggets have may end up just costing them against OKC. Maybe the Nuggets are still the second best team in the West, because that was another supposed contender, and the Nuggets made light work of them. But part of the reason why they made such light work of them is because everyone contributed. Everyone, including Cam Johnson, who had his finest performance as a member of the Denver Nuggets, scored 17 points, but he did a little bit of everything. Few assists, couple of blocks, couple of steals. And after the game, he talked about the difference last night, and it was just activity. And that role that Michael Porter used to have, that Cam Johnson has now, you may think it doesn't require a lot of activity. Go in the corner, and we'll call on you when you need. No. You got to work harder. You got to make yourself a more viable option. And I think Cam Johnson, because of the role he was playing, because he's the new guy with this group that has won a title together, I think he was very much letting other people take center stage. And it gets to the point where, dude, you got to get yours. Or else, how can you be trusted in the postseason if you can't show during the regular season that you can be relied upon? And I think it was coming from a good place with Cam Johnson, not coming into a team that had won a title and be like, I'm the man, get on my back. But it was also understanding that his role actually requires him to work harder than some of the other guys on the court, to be seen, to be found, to have an impact. And that was at times what Michael Porter didn't really sink in. That was when Michael Malone kept begging for him to rebound the ball. Go and rebound. Go do other stuff. Be more involved. And I thought Cam Johnson, maybe that light bulb turned on. And if it did, then the Nuggets are certainly better for it. And I know they played great defense last night, but I still have my concerns. I kind of feel like all this with Cam Johnson might just make them an even bigger juggernaut on the offensive end than they already are. And that's kind of not what I'm looking at to say, how can the Nuggets get better? The offense is good. They'll put up enough points in the playoffs. That's not the issue. Will they score in crunch time? That's part of it, but it starts on the defensive end in crunch time with them. So we'll see where Cam Johnson goes from here. Nuggets back at it tonight against San Antonio. But I will use the words of Kevin Durant last night when asked whether the second night of their back-to-back in Denver was the reason why they got blown out. And Kevin Durant, to his credit, said, no, it's our job. When we're scheduled to play, we got to go out and play and execute. So let's have the Nuggets have that energy tonight. And they historically have been very good on the second night of a back-to-back. I think people will forgive if they lose to San Antonio tonight and won't perhaps draw, these big conclusions about what a series between San Antonio and Denver would look like, since Denver's playing them on the second night of a back-to-back. But I think the way the Nuggets need to look at this after last night is, I don't know if you lose much by losing the game tonight, but what do you have to gain by winning? San Antonio's the darling of the NBA. Everyone's holding up San Antonio as the great hope to knock off Oklahoma City. What if you go in there second night of a back-to-back and beat them? What a statement that would make. We're in the time of the year now where the urgency level needs to go up, that even on the second night of a back-to-back, you can't just let it go and go, oh, well, it's not our night. Like, find an edge, find a reason to muster the enthusiasm and energy, and see if you can't make another major statement. Back-to-back nights, blowing out Houston and going to San Antonio and winning. I mean, the OKC conversation is still going to be there. But if they pull this off, how could you not say that below OKC, it's Denver? So we'll see if they take advantage of that opportunity. I'm not going to, hold them to a second game of back-to-back is difficult. But the upside is there for the Denver Nuggets. And the way they played last night, why can't they win tonight? That game's coming up at 7 o'clock on Extra Sports 1300. Story number 2, the NHL. They raised their hand and said, my bad. They patted their chest. Said, my bad. Well, not their bad. Referee's bad. They have rescinded the major penalty that Nathan McKinnon took by crashing into Edmonton goaltender Connor Ingram the other night, which got him kicked out of the game. And this is what I love about leagues and the way they handle their officials. No, love's not the right word. Hate. That's the word I'm looking for. I hate that the NHL comes out a day late and $1 short and went, no, that wasn't a major. Okay, but it was in the game and it cost the Avalanche the game. That was a game-changing call that the referees got wrong. And I get it. Like, there's nothing else the NHL can do, but just don't expect, everyone to give the NHL a round of applause, because the fact that now everyone's focused on, well, if Nathan McKinnon picks up, another major like tonight against Seattle, he's not going to be suspended. Like, who cares? That's beyond the point. The point is, the major was called in a game that was in the balance, and the Avalanche lost in large part because they lost their best player on a call that was wrong. So I guess in some way, kudos to the NHL for saying, like, this is wrong, but simply rescinding the the penalty after the fact is not going to get those points back. But what the biggest takeaway is just the admission of guilt. They got it wrong. Jared Bednar and Ryan Kaufman were right. That should be your big takeaway. And numerous other people, if we're being honest. Mark Rycroft and John Michael Lyles and Mark Mosier. Like, we're all right. Everybody is right. You're right. I'm right. Jared Bednar's right. We were all right. It was not a major penalty, and the NHL is admitting as much. Perhaps some satisfaction, although I'm sure when Jared Bednar is asked about the whole thing, he will basically say what I just said, and that it doesn't change the outcome of that game that the Avalanche lost. But the NHL, the referees got it wrong, which I don't even, you know me, human error. I'm okay with it. What I get upset about, what I was more upset about the other night, is that they went to Toronto and they upheld the call. That's what I have a problem with, because once again, it's this video replay system that is not doing its job. You want to have all this technology, which I don't like in the first place, but you have it. It's a reality. At least use it correctly. No one in Toronto thought that it could have been. And now the NHL comes back a day late and goes, oh, yeah, I was wrong. Well, what about this other like backstop that you're supposed to have, this eye in the sky that's supposed to get everything right? That is supposed to see Darnell Nurse. Like, I can forgive a referee on the ice not picking that up. I mean, it's still a missed call. It still goes down as that for that referee. But it's understandable. It happens. But you go to this supposed infallible robot. I mean, there are people, but, you know, it's technology. And they get it wrong too. That's what I had the bigger problem with. Referees miss calls. It happens. But if you have something in place which says we can review these and get these calls right, and they so rarely do. You ever notice that? They so rarely get it right. And I still don't think that the NHL fully understands what goaltender interference is. And certainly what major goaltending interference is. That is absolutely true after the other night. I just don't think they understand their own rule. I don't think they know how to apply their own rules correctly. And I think the rules are wrong. And it just feels like the Avs have been burned by goaltender interference on multiple occasions. Story number 3. Denver Broncos did make a signing today, but if you're a Broncos fan, you aren't going to like it. Lil Jordan Humphrey is back with the Denver Broncos, which just perfectly encapsulates, if you've been in cryo sleep, if you've been overseas for the last few weeks last week while free agency has been going on, and you're dropping in and you're going, so what I miss? You could be caught up just knowing this one move. Lil Jordan Humphrey coming back to the Denver Broncos tells you everything you need to know about what they've done this offseason, which is nothing. They are the only team in the NFL that has yet to bring in a player that played football for another team last year. But Sean Payton will tell you, not his guys. And he'll do some weird analogy about couches. This is an offseason that I think it is, and what Sean Payton isn't all bad. In fact, it's mostly good. But there comes a time when you have to deviate slightly from what you normally are for the sake of making your team better. Everybody on every other team is not a bad person or bad for the culture or a bad fit. Like, there have got to be some players. Okay, I'm not letting go Kenneth Walker or Travis Etienne, but just leaving them to the side for now. Okay, so you don't want to pay those guys. What about Romeo Dobbs? You want to pay him? Surely there is one free agent that has signed in the last few days that would conceivably be a good fit on the Denver Broncos. You can't tell me there's not one out there. But the Broncos are very set in their ways. And as they were building this thing up, I think more often than not, it served them well. But it just feels like the iron is hot right now with the Denver Broncos. There are other teams that are making moves. Not saying you have to be totally beholden to whatever, oh, they made a move, we got to make a move. But to understand how last season went, how it ended, where you realistically could have gone. And you have to assess all of those things and say there's a decent possibility that if we are not better this upcoming season, we're not getting closer to the ultimate prize than we were this year. I mean, free agency is basically over. And I don't see at pick 30 the Denver Broncos getting a difference maker. Because that's what Jahdae Barron was supposed to be. And I'm not saying he can't be that moving forward, but he wasn't that in his rookie year. Broncos can fortify their depth, but are they going to make themselves a better team for this upcoming season through the draft with where they're picking? I don't think so. This was the time to improve. So either there's some trade out there that we're all unaware of that's going to happen, or the Broncos really feel like they can get a step further this season by simply bringing the same team back. And I can't follow that logic. 719-247-1313. Take your thoughts on the three stories that are driving the show. Dre Greenlaw found a home very quickly. Tell you where it is. And we'll get the U.S. and Canada again in a different sport. And we have Italy to thank, or Drive Time Sports after this. Think you have the luck of the Irish? Enter to win our pot full of cash. So this will be a St. Paddy's Day you'll never forget with $5,000 in our Luck of the Irish giveaway. Just head to extrasports1300.com or kvor.com. Either way works. To enter this national contest, which is sponsored locally by Bullseye Plumbing, Heating, and Air. No luck needed. Win Bullseyes on target. So if you enjoyed the couple of hockey duels we got between the U.S. and Canada in the Olympics, you may enjoy what is coming up in the World Baseball Classic that maybe you did not know was going on. There's a lot going on. But Team USA will take on Canada. And it will be on Friday, which is tomorrow. 6 o'clock Mountain Time on Fox. Now, the circumstances of the U.S. getting there, or the story about the U.S. getting there, is interesting. Because the manager of Team USA, Mark DeRosa, who most recently was an analyst on MLB Network, seemed to not fully understand going into the Team USA's game against Italy what was at stake. This is what DeRosa said when chatting with his buds on MLB Network.
Ton of respect for Italy. It's weird. We want to win. We want to win this game, even though our tickets punched to the quarterfinals, because Mexico plays Italy actually tomorrow. So the way the schedule lines up, this is an important game for us.
Okay, they needed to beat Italy. It's not weird that you still want to win this game. You should want to win this game because you need this game to ensure your safe passage into the next round. And the lineup that Mark DeRosa threw out there was, let's say, even though this is an all-star team, it was not the best lineup he could have possibly thrown out there. And they lost to Italy. And so they needed some very convoluted tiebreaker, which was like, if Mexico scores no more than 5 runs, and like, I'll give Mark DeRosa this level of credit. They were quite convoluted, but you are the manager of Team USA. You were the steward of our national pastimes national team. You should probably be well versed for what's on the line. And you should probably make sure that you are well versed. But it looks like Mark DeRosa put out a lineup that would be put out by a manager that didn't necessarily need to win that game. And Mark DeRosa tried to, talk his way through it. And, I was just talking with my buds and I was aware of the things, but I misread them and blah, 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 blah. But the fact of the matter was, because of the U.S.'s loss to Italy, they were in real trouble of getting bounced, which would be quite disastrous. But to their rescue, last night came a bunch of plucky guys from the tri-state area, because they are American players of Italian descent, such as what you get when you cobble together World Baseball Classic. Not that many countries play baseball. And it's going to look even worse when we get to the Olympics in LA and teams are playing flag football. You have to stretch the truth a little bit here on who makes up Team Italy and Team Germany and Team I don't even know what is there a qualification process for flag football? I don't know, but there's going to be a lot of guys that are going to have USA as their birth home that are going to be playing for a team because their grandmother or grandfather are from there. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just speaks to, one, that the game of baseball hasn't quite spread as rapidly throughout the world as maybe baseball would like. So you kind of got to rely on American players of Italian descent. And it also makes this particular situation funnier because it is a bunch of Italian Americans, but Americans playing for Team Italy who eliminated Mexico and put Team USA into the next round of the World Baseball Classic. One of those, Vinny Pasquantino of Kansas City Royals fame. And he had a great line when he was being interviewed post-game on Fox.
That was unbelievable, huh? You're welcome, USA. We were thinking of you guys over at your hotel. We were thinking of you guys, so I'm glad you guys could join us in the party.
I love that. I love that. And it's works on two different levels. He's talking about Team USA, but he himself is American and saying, you're welcome, USA. I mean, talk your talk, man. You deserve it. I think he had 3 home runs or something in that game. So, Mark DeRosa, you are off the hook. I would suggest figuring out every machination possible for the upcoming round or the rest of the tournament for that matter. And I would make sure, because more people are going to start to pay attention now, make sure that what you're saying is the truth and not look like, because I want to like the World Baseball Classic. And I do. I thought the final between Japan and the U.S., remember Shohei facing Mike Trout, didn't go the way I wanted it to, but it was quite epic. And we even had this in the Olympics. Right? The early rounds are not required viewing. I'll say that. You don't have to quite lock in while, some of the herd is thinned out here. But for Team USA, like other countries, some of them are just happy to be here. They're just participating. Team USA is here to win the whole thing. So when you misspeak or whatever it was, and it makes it seem like you're not taking this seriously. And the timing could not be worse because you're coming off of the Olympics, which we take very seriously. And here's the next international competition, and it looks like it's a charity softball game going on. Right? Mark DeRosa is talking about how they had hung out in the clubhouse well into the night after beating Mexico, and then they turned around. It looks like they're not taking it seriously. Meanwhile, Paul Skeens is playing on Team USA. He told Mark DeRosa this, for the servicemen and women. Like Paul Skeens, that you may take Paul Skeens out of Air Force. You're never taking the Air Force out of Paul Skeens. The guy, I mean, how much more serious can you take it than basically dedicating your presence on Team USA to our servicemen and women? Just when you thought you could not love Paul Skeens even more. And then the manager doesn't know the rules and is hanging out in the clubhouse with the fellas. It's not a great look. Time to lock in Mark DeRosa. And also, you're not giving baseball managers a good name. There's already a feeling in baseball circles that all the manager is there to do is to look pretty in a baseball uniform because all of the decisions are being made upstairs from the general manager. And the fact that Mark DeRosa and and I know he played in Major League Baseball, but he was an analyst. It's like, what if Charles Barkley coached Team USA in the Olympics? Like, you like Charles Barkley. He knows ball, but is it the most serious choice you can make to lead? No. You have Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich, Mike Krzyzewski. You get a serious coach. They got a TV analyst. Fine if he doesn't do things like not know the rules. Time to lock in. Because I don't know if you've noticed, USA Canada, it's kind of a thing right now. Dare I say, it's a heated rivalry. Friday evening, 6 o'clock, United States and Canada, Dominican Republic against Korea, Italy. In a world where Team USA does not win, yeah, go Italy. I mean, they're really all Americans anyway. So it's not really cheating on Team USA. 719-247-1313. More Drive Time Sports after this. Producer DJ Michaels is messing with my bumper music. That's what's going on here. Gotta take that out. No. That does not go in the rotation, DJ. How dare you? So one or another former Denver Bronco, one of the few Denver Broncos. How much do you feel if you're a Denver Broncos player that the Broncos decided not to bring back? They're bringing back Kroll and Prentice and Lil Jordan Humphrey and Sam Ellinger and J.K. Dobbins, and you are one of the few that they said, yeah, we're good. We're all good here. John Franklin Myers, we're good. And Dre Greenlaw, we're good here. Well, Dre Greenlaw was on the unemployment line for all of 5 seconds as he is going back to San Francisco. I think, and it wouldn't have come without risk. I've acknowledged that the entire way. Bringing back Dre Greenlaw would have been a risk. It was a risk signing him. But there are worthwhile risks and there are not worthwhile risks. And at that position, I thought it was a worthwhile risk that the Broncos gave the Dre Greenlaw thing another shot. They chose to go in a different direction. It's Alex Singleton and Justin Stranad there. And the 49ers, who only had to get rid of Dre Greenlaw because of money. They had to shed some salary, immediately got him back. Like today, this morning, the news broke that finally the Broncos were releasing Dre Greenlaw. Some people were doing the Brian Windhorst fingers. What's going on? They haven't released Dre Greenlaw. It was just to see if somebody would offer them picks because George Payton loves his picks. Except that one time when John Schneider called him. But all the rest of the time, or when they were trying to bring in Sean Payton, but every other time, George Payton loves his picks. He's just trying to squeeze a draft pick out of somebody, which is fine. It's their prerogative, but the writing was on the wall here. Dre Greenlaw wasn't going to be a Denver Broncos, so who in their right mind would give George Payton anything? So they released him this morning, finally. And the 49ers had him back on the roster by lunchtime or shortly thereafter. Time zones is probably lunchtime in San Francisco, but not here anymore. I don't know if that... I think what it says is that San Francisco never really wanted to let the guy go in the first place, but difficult decisions had to be made with where they were, and he was one of the difficult decisions along with Talanoa Hufanga, which was another worthwhile risk that paid off for the Denver Broncos. So Dre Greenlaw going right back to San Francisco. So that will be one guy to monitor. You'll watch how you'll easily see how Kenneth Walker does. And Travis Etienne and Romeo Doubs. John Franklin Myers. Some of the decisions or indecisions that the Broncos made. They're just a list of some guys that you just keep tabs on and see how they're doing. And see if the Broncos were right in either letting them go or not being willing to pay them. But Dre Greenlaw going back to San Francisco. And the Broncos onward and upward with the duo of Singleton and Stranad. And I would expect the Broncos to address that position in the draft as well. I don't feel as strongly about them letting Dre Greenlaw go as them basically sitting on the sidelines during free agency. I would have gone a different way. I would have went Greenlaw, Stranad. But I could see the merits to Singleton and Sternad. So that's where Dre Greenlaw is going to be back playing this year. Let's get to some of your texts here. Some of Brett's texts. Brett has a few texts in. Talking about the Nuggets tonight, 7 o'clock, taking on San Antonio, second night of a back-to-back. I said earlier, historically, the Nuggets are very good. On a second night of a back-to-back, Brett said, how did the Nuggets do against the Knicks after a second game of a back-to-back? Was that a second game of a back-to-back? If it was, it did not go well. So you're right. The exception that proves the rule, I believe, is what we call that. Or just the exception to the rule. Nuggets, look at the record, second night of a back-to-back. Last few years, been very good. And the opportunity is there for the Nuggets to make a big-time statement. Because everybody loving on San Antonio. I saw Tim Legler last night on Sports Center with SVP. Jamal Murray was on there as well. But Tim Legler, who I think is as sharp as anybody covering the NBA, said that he was willing to put aside the fact that San Antonio has no playoff experience because he thinks they're just that good and that built for the postseason. They said OKC and San Antonio are kind of on their own level, and Denver would be, I think he said, a group of Denver, Houston, Minnesota, and Lakers. He would put Denver at the top. Nuggets go into San Antonio tonight, get a win. That may change a little bit. Plus, these games are important for potential seeding. Like, the Nuggets aren't completely out of the woods yet when it comes to the play-in. I don't think they'll end up in the play-in. But just looking at some of the tiebreakers, they've now won the season series with Houston. They've won the season series with Minnesota. They have a chance to win the season series with the Lakers coming up on Saturday. So these are all tiebreakers that would go to the Denver Nuggets. So not just for really the play-in, but to see the Nuggets perhaps end up as high as the 3 seed, having these tiebreakers could help them do that. Tonight's game, not so important as a tiebreaker as much as, kind of trying to measure yourselves against the team that everybody is loving on these days and see if maybe a 7-game series. And I think it's possible. I think it's very possible that the Nuggets beat the Spurs in a 7-game series. But if they get absolutely destroyed tonight, may have to back off slightly on that. And then Brett says with the Broncos and their approach to free agency, which, can we really call it free agency? Like, I know it's technically free agency, but if you're bringing back all your own players, that's like some kind of weird purgatory between free agency and just giving a guy a contract extension. They haven't really participated in free agency, if we're being honest about this. And Brett says, at least we kept all of our crappy tight ends and fullbacks at over the market price. Like, I'll say this in defense of Sean Payton, so get your recordings ready. Lucas Kroll didn't cost a lot of money. Okay, and look, maybe that just adds to the frustration because the Broncos are just sitting on this money that most of these guys that are bringing back, Prentice and Ellinger and all, aren't costing them that much. So they still have the means to go out and make a move, but aren't. Now, I was thinking this yesterday driving back from DIA. There are some teams yesterday that as all these free agent deals became official, that had to get under the salary cap, had to be cap compliant. Cleveland, Dallas, there were a couple of other teams, and I wondered maybe this is where the Denver Broncos make moves. I don't know if it would be super satisfying to you as a Broncos fan if they were, shopping at Goodwill when they finally have the money to shop at a nicer store. I don't know nice stores. H&M, is that a nice store compared to Goodwill? They have this money and, sifting through the bargain bin of what Dallas or Cleveland or I don't know if that is the type of free agency that you were hoping the Broncos would be participating in, but David Njoku is one of those guys. Although, as I say it, Sean Payne doesn't like tight ends. I don't know where Davis Webb is on tight ends. I don't know. And I was a big proponent of the Broncos landing David Njoku. I don't know if they would do anything with him if they got him. But that's probably the biggest name they got let go. But because clearly with free agency going the way it is, your one hope for anything different, if you look at the Denver Broncos and you say, I like most of this, I like a little different going into next year, here. That's all Davis Webb. Utilization of tight ends, the running game, all this kind of stuff. Not making Bo Nix angry every other week. Like, that's all Davis Webb. We're putting all the – how are the Broncos going to be different or better than they were a year ago? Davis Webb. In Davis, we trust. That's maybe the motto with Broncos country here. That'll do it for me again. Nuggets and Spurs coming up tonight at 7 on Extra Sports 1300. Talk to you tomorrow.